Welcome to the Fundamentals of Editing. This is Lesson 1, the first of 7 lessons in Adobe Premiere. Today we'll be covering what you're going to need for these lessons. Then we'll talk about how to get set up for editing. Then we will do some very basic drag and drop editing in Premiere in preparation for our first project. So what do you need? Well, first of all, of course, you need Premiere and hopefully the whole Adobe Creative Suite installed on your computer, on your main hard drive of your desktop or your laptop computer. From what I understand, anything smaller like a tablet simply is not fast enough to efficiently edit with Adobe Premiere. You also really should have an external hard drive, if at all possible. The application itself should be installed, of course, on your main hard drive, but for best performance, everything else that you use in Premiere should be on an external hard drive. Your assets, project files, your scratch disks on an external drive. This is an SSD drive, which is great, but any USB 3 external hard drive will work just fine. I also recommend that you have a mouse. From what I understand, trackpads are a little tough to deal with in terms of video editing. Get yourself a mouse. We do a lot of right-clicking and so on, and a mouse works very well for video editing. And then, of course, you're going to need assets. And the main assets for all of our lessons are in the C Scout Assets folder, which is available for you to download from SharePoint on the website. We're going to store those on our external hard drive on the computer, and it's very important that we get things organized before we start editing. One thing to realize about Premiere is that none of the assets and even the render files and so on actually live inside of your Premiere project. They live inside of a location where you store them, and then they are simply referenced by the program. So you need good file structure and good organization of your files, which should be set up before you start editing in Premiere. So let's take a look at my external hard drive. I have created a folder in here called Video Editing. I recommend that you do the same. And inside of this, I'd like you to create 4 folders. I've already created 3 here, and I'll create 1 more. One called Assets, and this is where you will store all the raw video and audio files and graphics files and so on that you will be using in your projects. And I have already downloaded the C Scouts assets, which we'll be using throughout all of these lessons. The project folder is going to contain data files that contain all the decisions you make about choice of shots, length of shots, transitions, and so on. There's no video in these files, but lots and lots of data about your creative decisions. Scratch, this is a folder for under the hood, behind the scenes kind of files that need to be stored somewhere. And now we're going to create one more folder here. So I'm going to New Folder, and I recommend that you use all caps when you create folders. That way you can kind of tell the difference visually between a folder and files. And I'm going to call this folder Movies. And this folder is where we're going to store our final product, our exported movies. So there's our 4 folders. And once you create folders, especially with the assets, you don't want to mess with these. You don't want to move stuff. You don't want to rename stuff, because Premiere is constantly accessing these and referencing them. And if you change stuff, it's going to confuse Premiere. Premiere won't know where to find stuff. The red screen of death, as they call it, the media offline screen, and then you have to go and fix things. So it's good to get organized in advance. It's not the most fun part of video editing, but it's going to save you so much headache down the line if you get yourself organized ahead of time. And now we are ready to open Premiere. So I'm going to Premiere on the dock, clicking that, and then waiting while the program loads. And then we get this home window in which, if we have existing projects already, we can choose them from here. But in this case, we want to go to New Project. And a New Project window opens, in which the first thing we need to do is give the project a name. I am going to call this Premiere Lessons, because we will be using this one project for all of the lessons in this course. And now we need to tell Premiere where to store this project. By default, it's going to go to my main hard drive documents folder, but we don't want it there. Let's browse to my external hard drive and go to the video editing folder I created, and we're going to put it in the projects folder, and that's where we'll store all of our projects, including all of our weekly exercises. Now, here you see an item called video rendering and playback, and the renderer by default is set to Mercury Playback Engine GPU acceleration. This is great if you have a really fast video card, graphic card, something like that, but it can mess you up if you don't. So switch to Mercury Playback Engine software only. Now we go from this general tab to the next tab, which says Scratch Disks. I'm going to click on that. Now Scratch Disks, this is kind of a mysterious thing where these files, render files, processing files get stored, and you don't really have to do anything with them, but you do have to store them. So I think of a Scratch Disk as being like, you know, your junk drawer that you have at home where you put stuff that you don't want to throw it out, but you don't exactly use it, so you all just shove it in there. So let's think of the Scratch Disk as kind of like the junk drawer. So here in the Scratch Disk tab, there's these 7 buttons that let you assign where all this miscellaneous stuff is going to go. And by default, it's all going to go to the same place as the project. Now that's kind of like putting all your junk drawer stuff in your top drawer. It's going to get really messy. So I don't think we want to do that. So unfortunately, you have to go through these buttons one at a time to set them. I don't know why they don't just give you one button to do this, but they don't. So let's go to the first one. It says captured video, whatever that is. Browse. Let's go to our Scratch folder and say choose. Okay, next one, captured audio. Luckily, it already knows what, it's got the hint what we want here. Choose. Video previews. Choose. Audio previews. Choose. Project autosave. Now this one's a little different. These are automatically saved versions of your project that we set up to save every 10 minutes or so. And in case the electricity goes out or our Premiere crashes or something, we want to be able to find these quick. So I say, let's leave that same as project. Good. Next one. CC library downloads. I don't know what that is. Put it in the junk drawer. Motion graphics template in the junk drawer. Okay. Choose. All right, we're done. Luckily, once you do this, you don't have to do it again until you switch external hard drives. We're putting everything except for the application on the external hard drive through this process. And now we can click OK. And a blank Premiere project opens up. This workspace that we're looking at is the editing workspace. There are other workspaces available for color, effects, audio, and so on. In this class, we'll occasionally use the color workspace, but mostly we'll be in the editing workspace. Sometimes this workspace will get kind of messed up if you change the size of windows and move stuff around, or if somebody else works on your computer and messes it up. And to get it back to normal, what you do is you go up to Window, Workspaces, and you make sure the editing workspace is selected, and then you go Reset to Saved Layout, and then it will go back to sort of the factory default workspace arrangement. Now let's go to Preferences. Now if you're on a PC, you need to go to Edit, Preferences. On a Mac, you go to Premiere Pro, Preferences. And we will first go to the timeline preferences. And the first item here says video transition default duration. This is how long a dissolve is going to be, because that's the most commonly used transition. And by default, it's set for 30 frames, which is kind of a long transition. The industry standard for TV is 10 frames. So let's go ahead and change that to 10 frames. A few items here that I recommend down here where it says snap playhead in timeline when snap is enabled. I'll explain snapping a little bit later, but let's just go ahead and enable that. And then there's one down here that's checked by default, play after rendering previews. That's just an annoying thing that's not necessary, so let's uncheck that. Next, let's go to the appearance item here, and the main thing you can do here is make the workspace lighter or darker. This is kind of dark for working, but maybe you like the dark. I don't know. I kind of like the brighter setting. Another preference we should set has to do with autosave, and we have the option to save as often as we like. Let's say maybe every 10 minutes. And here, media cache. This is similar to scratch disks. These are files that are generated as you work, and you don't actually do anything with them, but they're necessary. But after a while, they can start to clog up your system and really take up a lot of room on your hard drive. Now, by default, Premiere is going to store the media cache files in this really, really weird location, buried deep inside of my main hard drive. And there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of these files generated every time we edit, and it's just going to blow up my main hard drive. I'm going to run out of hard drive space really fast. So first thing let's do, let's move the storage location to, guess where? Yes, my Scratch folder. Good. All right, but now it's gonna blow up the Scratch folder like a balloon every time I edit, and it's gonna store these files forever, and I don't really need them forever. Once I'm done with a project, I don't really need them anymore. So I can just delete them with this button. And you know, there's no danger in doing this because you can always get these files back just by opening up a project again and then rendering it. And I'll explain rendering later on. Or you can set up to automatically manage these media cache files by either going to automatically delete files older than so many days or automatically deleting the oldest cache files when the folder gets bigger than, like, you know, however many gigabytes you want to say. So it's a good idea to set one of these up. I had the worst time for a long time with my hard drive getting filled up because I didn't know about this, and now I know about it, and now you do too. And now let's take a tour of the workspace, which basically has 6 areas that we want to look at. Down here in the bottom left-hand corner is the project window. And this is where things start out. We're going to shortly be importing media into this window, and we'll be able to look at lists of it here. This window also has an effects tab with a whole bunch of different effects and transitions that you can apply to clips. Then up here is the source window, and this is where you preview material from the project window and pre-trim stuff before putting it on the timeline. This window also has an effect controls tab where you manipulate and control different effects and transitions that you apply to materials on the timeline. And here is the timeline, and this will soon be filled with tracks that we will be putting clips onto and transitions and effects and all sorts of things. This is where it really happens. The editing really happens. And then up here is the program window, and this is where you will see what is on the timeline and be able to scrub through and play and preview what you have on the timeline. And as you do that, you will get signals here in the audio meter. And finally, this is the toolbar, which has specific tools for doing specific tasks. You should be aware that you need to activate windows in order to work in them. Right now, the project window is activated. You can tell by this thin blue line around it. And as I click around, different windows become activated. Now we are ready to import media into our Premiere project. So we go down here to the project window, and I'm going to right-click in the empty area and select Import. And then I navigate to my external hard drive, to my video editing folder, to my assets folder, and I want to import the entire C-Scout assets. I select that and click Import, and it comes in and shows up down here in the project window. Now, by default, the view here is an icon view, which some people like because it provides thumbnails of each clip, but I find it just takes up too much room. And so here's the icon view button, and to the left of it is a list view option, which I recommend. When I click on that, I get just text. And that's handy because when I open up a bin, I get these sub bins, and then I can look in them, and there's lots of room for actually looking at what we have. Now, by the way, once a folder comes into Premiere, we don't call it a folder anymore. We actually call it by a new name. We call it a bin. This comes from the old film days when we actually used kind of like laundry bins with canvas sides and racks for hanging clips. And so we still call them bins in video editing. Now, this gives me lots of room to display these, but actually we could get more room by getting rid of this unnecessary display up here, and you can get rid of that by, see here where it says Project Premiere Lessons, and there are these 3 horizontal bars. Click on that and uncheck Preview Area, and now we have more room for displaying the contents. Let's go to the Interviews bin, and to the left of this is this little arrow, and I click on that, and here are the actual clips that are in this bin. And the first item here is called Alex Interview. Let's double click on this, and don't click on the name because that you can end up renaming something accidentally that way. Instead, click on the icon, double click, and the clip opens up here in the source window. Now, to make sure that we're seeing the whole clip, you should check this area down here, which is called the zoom level selector, and make sure it says fit. It can be zoomed out or in to different levels if you want to get close-up views of things, to work on some compositing or something like that. You can go all the way into 400%. But to view the whole image, you would think it would be 100, but that doesn't show you the whole image. It needs to say fit. Now, anytime you want a full screen view of this image or any screen, press the tilde key here on the keyboard in the upper left-hand corner below the escape key, and it will give you a full screen view. And you can do this with any window. If I mouse over the project window, I get a full screen view of the project window. Now, in order to play something in the source window, we have to activate the window first, and then the easiest and most common way to play a clip is to use the space bar on your keyboard. Pressing once makes it play, and then pressing again makes it pause. Another method is to use the J, K, and L keys on the keyboard. L is play. If I hit L twice, it goes twice as fast, three times as fast. K is stop. J is reverse. Twice J is twice speed reverse, and so on. You also have transport controls here at the bottom of the viewer. This is the play button, and when I click it again, it stops. If you want to go frame by frame, you can use the right or left arrow keys to move one frame at a time, forward or reverse. The up and down arrow keys make the playhead jump from the beginning to the end of the clip. And the playhead is this little blue nubbin here that you see. And another great thing you can do is grab the playhead and just drag it anywhere you want, or click in this area, which is called the ruler, and it will jump wherever your cursor is. But you can also use this to do what we call scrubbing, which is dragging it in order to find like a particular action within the clip. Now we have some numbers here on the left side and the right side. These are time code numbers, and they are measured in hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. The time code number on the right represents the entire running time of the clip, which is 24 seconds and 10 frames. The time code number on the left side represents the time code at the playhead position. Now that we've got a clip loaded up into the source window, we're really close to being ready to start editing. But before we can do that, we need something called a sequence on the timeline. A sequence is basically a set of empty tracks onto which we can start putting video and audio. Now, it's a little more complicated than you might think, because there's all different kinds of video these days. When I started out in video, there were just a few kinds of video. It was kind of like chocolate and vanilla, but now it's like Baskin-Robbins with all sorts of different sizes and codecs and so on. And you really need to have a sequence that has settings that matches your clips. Now, there is a quick and dirty way of doing this, but you know what? I'm not going to show it to you today, because I want you to sort of learn the hard way a little bit, so that later on you will know how to deal with unusual situations. So first, what we have to do is find out some basic information about our source clip. So let's go to the Alex interview down here in the project window. I'm going to right click on it and go to Properties. And I get this window, which gives me some useful information. The main thing I need to know is the image size, and it says 1920 by 1080. This is standard HD video. And the other important thing is the frame rate, 23.976, which is a very precise way of saying 24 frames a second, and that's how we refer to it usually, as 24p, 24 progressive, 24 frames a second. Now, to create a new sequence, let's go up to File, New, and Sequence. And now this window opens up, which will give you some idea of how many choices there are. You've got all these different presets. One of my favorites is this one called Digital SLR. This is useful for most kinds of projects. Let's go to 1080p. That's the size that we saw. And we know our footage is at 24 frames a second. So let's choose DSLR 24. And let's also give our sequence a name, Lesson 01. Click OK. And voila, here we have a new sequence. Now the timeline has been filled in with these video and audio tracks. Everything above this gray line is video. These are video tracks, empty video tracks, and everything underneath are audio tracks. Now, when you start discussing video editing, it's important not to get confused between the term tracks and clips. Remember that tracks are it's like a racetrack with roads that the race cars are going to run on, and the race cars are the clips. The roads they run on are the tracks. And currently we, by default, have 3 video tracks and 3 empty audio tracks available, and we can add more, up to 99 if we want. Now here at the upper left-hand corner of the timeline, you'll see the words Lesson 1. This is the name of the sequence that we created. And we will be creating more sequences as time goes on, and they will end up being tabs that we can select along the top of the timeline. Now also down here in the project window, there is also an item called Lesson 1, and it has a different icon next to it. This is the icon for a sequence, and this represents the sequence that we just created. Now, because we had the interviews bin highlighted when we created this new sequence ended up in that bin, but we want to put it in its own bin. So I am going to right-click here and go to New Bin, going to all caps, and I'm going to call this new bin Sequences. Okay, and then I'm going to go down here and grab that Lesson 1, and I'm going to drag it up to the Sequences bin, drop it there, and this is where I'm going to put all my other sequences as we start to build them. I know this seems fussy, but believe me, it's so important to keep your project window organized as you go along, because it's going to get full of all sorts of things. And when you want to find stuff, you know how frustrating it is to find stuff in a junk drawer where there's no organization at all. It'll drive you crazy. Okay? So it's worth taking the time to keep things neat and clean and organized in your project window. And now we're really ready to start editing. Now, when a lot of people start editing, they will do so by just taking whole clips and dragging them onto the timeline and then whittling them down to size on the timeline. But often that doesn't make sense, because quite often you have clips that are way longer than what you actually want. And so we pre-trim them in the source window. It's kind of like when you go to the lumber yard or Home Depot and they have these huge pieces of wood that are much bigger than you really want. So often you have them cut it roughly down to size so you can put it in your truck or your car to take it home. We do sort of the same thing here. So we're going to play through this clip.
Well, I mean, for me, Sea Scouts is all about opportunity.
I'm going to pause right there, and I'm going to make what's called an in point. And then I'm going to make an out point a little bit later on at the end of the part that I want. There are two different methods for making in and out points. One is to use these little brackets here. See, this one says mark in, and this one says mark out. And you can see the keyboard shortcut. Mark in is the I key, out is the O key. So if I click on this bracket, you'll see that here at the playhead position is a light blue line, and everything to the right of it is highlighted in light gray. Now I'm going to play the clip again and listen for a cue where I want to have this clip end.
It's the opportunity for youth to come out and learn about the rich maritime history that exists in the United States. And actually, Sea Scouts are all over the world, too. It's not just us here in the U.S.
That's my out point. So I can now use the keyboard shortcut. I'm going to click the O key. And you see now only the section that I want is highlighted in light gray. Now, the simplest, quickest way, but not necessarily the best way always, but the simplest, quickest way to get video onto the timeline is to grab it from the source window and drag down to the timeline. I get these blue bars that appear, and then I have to drag them until they line up with the video 1 and audio 1 tracks and release, and there they are on the timeline. And immediately I get an image here in the program window showing me what is under this timeline playhead. Now what if I only wanted the audio or only the video from this clip? Well, there's buttons here. You see this one on the left says drag video only. If I click on that and drag, only the video goes on the timeline. And of course, with drag audio only the audio goes on the timeline. Now, I want to get rid of those two, video and audio only. So to get rid of them, I can just click and drag in the timeline area to highlight both of them, and then hit the delete key, and they are gone. Now we're going to put a second clip onto the timeline. I'm going to close the interviews bin and open the bin called B-roll and scroll down and look for a clip called Leslie at Helm CU. That stands for close-up, of course. Double clicking on it, and now I'm going to scrub through it and find the part where she's turning the wheel. There it starts. So I'm going to make an in point, and then she stops turning the wheel, so I will make an out point. And now I'm going to drag this onto the timeline and put it right after the interview clip. And now let's take a bit of a tour of the timeline. First thing is this little blue nub here with the line running down from underneath it. This is the timeline playhead. I can grab this and drag it around, and notice that there's also a playhead here in the program window that moves in tandem with this playhead. The area where the playhead is located, this is called the ruler because it looks kind of like a ruler, and these are time code numbers that tell you where you are within this sequence. Down here at the bottom is a scroll bar, and I can use this to expand the view, and then the clips get bigger. Of course, they're not really getting bigger. In the movie, we're just zooming in on them so we can get a bigger view, and you can also use the scroll bar to move around when you've got a lot of clips on the timeline and you have to move quickly from one end of a 2-hour sequence to the other. You can use the scroll bar. And here on the left side of the timeline is what we're calling the timeline control area, and this has a whole bunch of different tools for targeting tracks and muting tracks and so on, and we'll get into that a lot more later on. Now, as far as playing clips on the timeline, we use all the same methods that we learned for playing clips in the source window. When the timeline window is active, you can use the space bar to play. You can use the J, K, and L keys, or you can use the transport controllers up here in the program window. You can also go one frame at a time with the right and left arrow keys, or you can jump from clip to clip using the up and down arrow keys. Now here in the upper left-hand corner of the timeline, there's a button that looks like an old-fashioned horseshoe magnet. This is called the snapping tool. What this does is it causes a certain behavior of things like the playhead. Watch what happens when I scrub towards this cut between the two clips. When I get near it, all of a sudden the playhead just snaps right to that cut. Or here at the end of this clip, snap, there it goes. Now if I turn this off, watch how this is different. I scrub around the cut and it does not snap. So it's handy to have this on because it allows you to accurately move the playhead to a cut, which is sometimes very important that you get that frame by frame accuracy. But then again, sometimes it can be annoying and maybe you want to be 1 frame or 2 frames off of a cut, and then it's handy to turn it off. So you have that choice. Now, snapping also affects clips as well. So watch this. I'm going to highlight Leslie at Helm here. I'm going to drag it away from the other clip and then drag it back towards the clip, and boom, it snaps. It closes that gap just like that, which is great because, you know, if you're trying to eyeball it, you might miss by 1 or 2 frames and end up with a black space between the clips. Sometimes, though, you want complete control, of course. So I'm going to turn snapping off, and now if I want to create a tiny gap, I can do that. Or if I want to overlap a little bit, I can do that. Now, what if I change my mind about how long I want one of these clips to run or where I want it to cut? Am I locked into the choices I made when I trimmed the clip initially? No, not at all. If I decide I want to make this shot of Leslie at the helm a little longer, I just mouse over the end of it, and you see how my cursor turns into this red bracket. And I can now drag and extend that clip out, make it longer. So what it's doing is it's restoring some of the material that I trimmed off earlier. So now we've got a little 12-second movie here on the timeline, and already I want some soundtrack music. So let's go over here to B-roll bin, close it, and then go to the music bin and open it. And I'm going to open the very first one called 5-0 July. I'm double clicking, and then up here in the source window I get a display of these squiggly lines, and these of course are waveforms which represent the strength of the music signal. Now if I try to drag it from the window itself, it won't go because there's no video here. I have to grab the drag audio only button, and then I drag it to the timeline, and I want to put it not at the end of this but underneath on the audio 2 track, and I'm going to drop it right there. And I can see there's a blank space at the beginning, so I'm going to trim that off and then slide this over so the music starts right away. And then it's way longer than the video, so I'm just going to roughly trim it to match the video. And let's play it. Obviously, it's way too loud. So we need to lower the volume. To do that, we can just right-click on the music clip and go to Audio Gain. And here we have the opportunity to adjust gain by, I'm going to say, -20, -20 decibels. And then I click OK. And you see the waveforms get a lot smaller. And now when I play this,
it's the opportunity for youth to come out and learn about the rich maritime history that exists in the United States.
Okay, so now we have created a simple little movie, and that's as much as I'm going to show you today in terms of actually putting together a movie. But we still don't actually have a movie per se. We just have an editing project here. And if you were to just click save and then give your saved project file to someone, they wouldn't have a movie. They wouldn't be able to watch your movie. They would only be able to open it in Premiere if they have Premiere and they have all your assets and everything all hooked up. Because we don't have a movie yet. We don't have a movie until we export, and that's what we're going to do now. Now, it's very important to make sure that either your timeline window or your program window are highlighted when you go to export, because if you have your source window or your project window highlighted when you export, it's only going to export what is currently selected, the one clip that you have been looking at and using here in these windows. So we have to highlight the timeline window or the program window, and then we go to File, Export, Media, and an export window opens up in which we have a number of choices to make. Once again, there are many flavors of video, and there are many different video platforms that you may be exporting for. If you're exporting for showing a movie in a giant screen theater, you would use different export settings than if you're exporting for YouTube or for a phone or something like that. First thing to do is to go where it says Format here, and I want you to go to H.264. Next, we have a window that says Presets, and the default is very tempting. It says Match Source, which will give you an exported movie that has the same properties as your movie. But especially if you go with the high bit rate, it's going to export a movie that is going to be a huge file, and it is not friendly to a lot of different players. So I recommend that you use a different preset. So let's drop this down, and I have had very good luck with the Vimeo preset. So I'm going to select Vimeo 1080p Full HD, and this will work just fine for YouTube as well. And then we need to name our movie. So we go to where it says Output Name, and we click on this blue name here, and that opens up a Save As window. Let's call this, I don't know, Test Export 01. And then we need to specify where we're going to put this, or else it'll go who knows where. All right, so let's open this up and let's navigate to our external drive, to video editing, and the movies folder. That's where we're going to put all of our final movies, and click Save. Now, we have not saved the movie yet. All we did was save all the settings and the name and all that. We have one more step to take before we actually export a movie, and you have two choices when it comes to exporting, queue or export. If you just want to go straight to exporting, you can click Export. But a lot of people choose this option instead, queue. And what this does is, after a moment, it's going to open up a different Adobe Suite program called Media Encoder, which is a great program for exporting movies, for transcoding movies from one file format to another. And the advantage of using Q is that it is a separate program, and you can continue working on projects in Adobe Premiere while a movie is exporting in Media Encoder. And here we are in Media Encoder, and my movie has showed up here with the name and everything. And then to actually start exporting, you have to go up to this upper right hand corner, the green arrow, and you would click that, and then you can see the movie exporting down here. It's very important to do a quality check after exporting to make sure it really exported and you've exported what you want. So I'm going to hide Media Encoder, and I'm going to hide Premiere Pro, and I'm going to go to my external drive and the video editing folder, movies. There's my test export.
The opportunity for youth to come out and learn about the rich maritime history that exists in the United States. And actually, Sea Scouts are all over the world too. It's not just us here in the U.S.
In the yard, he says it's probably another week in order to be.
Good. I can see. I got everything I wanted. I can go into a presentation confidently. The last thing you want to have happen is go into a client presentation and you screen a movie that you didn't quality check, and there's something wrong with it. There's media offline, or the music's not there, or whatever. It's so important to do a quality check after doing an export. So that is the end of today's lesson. And for the project today, we're going to use the exact same footage, all the Sea Scout footage. And I'd like you to put together about a 1 or 2 minute sort of promo piece for the Sea Scouts based on what you have available so far in terms of assets and tools. Now, I have not given you a lot of tools yet, not a lot to work with. And I don't expect a lot. Just do something pretty simple, just something that combines the interview shots with the B-roll shots and tells a simple little story. The first thing to do would be to go through everything that's in these bins and see what you've got. So you start getting some ideas on what you can do and how you can do it. And there's sound effects, there's music, there's the interviews, even some graphics with Sea Scout logo and so on. So have fun putting together some kind of little promo program, and I look forward to seeing what you do.